What's going on, YouTube? Welcome back to Wacky Wednesday. And today, we're going to be reading It, Chapter 3, 6 Phone Calls. We ain't reading all 6 phone calls yet. We are reading 2 of them. Only 2. You know why? Because I said so. That's why. Anyways, Section 1. Stanley Eurus takes a bath. Patricia Eurus later told her mother she should have known something was wrong. She should have known it, she said, because Stanley never took baths this early in the evening, or took baths in the early evening. He showered early each morning and sometimes soaked. Thank you, Amber. He showered early each morning and sometimes soaked late at night, with a magazine in one hand and a cold beer in another. I can sympathize with that. But baths at 7 p.m. were not his style. And then there was this thing about the books. It should have delighted him. Instead, in some obscure way she did not understand, it seemed to have upset and depressed him. About 3 months before that terrible night, Stanley had discovered that a childhood friend of his had turned out to be a writer. Not a real writer, Patricia told her mother, but a novelist. The name on the books was William Denbrough, but Stanley had sometimes called him Stuttering Bill. He had worked his way through almost all the man's books, had, in fact, been reading the last on the night of the bath, the night of the curiosity. Out of the curiosity. She had put it down just after 3 chapters. I'm sorry. The night of May 28th, 1985. What's up, DK? Yeah, I'm back. But my TV is still up and PlayStation's still up. So. The night of May 28th, 1985. Patty herself had picked up one of the earlier ones, out of curiosity. She had put it down just after 3 chapters. It had not just been a novel, she told her mother later. It had been a horror book. She said it just that way, all one word, the way she would have said a sex book. Patty was a sweet, kind woman, but not terribly articulate, like myself. She had wanted to tell her mother how much that book had frightened her and why it had upset her, but had not been able. It was full of monsters, she said. Full of monsters chasing after little children. There were killings and I don't know, bad feelings and hurt, stuff like that. It had, in fact, struck her as almost pornographic. That was the word which kept eluding her, because she had never in her life spoken it, although she knew what it meant. Stan felt as if he'd rediscovered one of his childhood chums. He talked about writing to him, but I knew he wouldn't. I knew those stories made him feel bad, too. And then Patty Eurus began to cry. That night, lacking roughly 6 months of being 28 years from the day in 1957 when George Denbrough had met Pennywise the Clown. Hang on. I need water real quick, chat. Sorry. That night, lacking roughly 6 months of being 28 years from the day in 1957 when George Denbrough had met Pennywise the Clown, Stanley and Patty had been sitting in the den of their home in a suburb of Atlanta. You know what? Thank you, James. Appreciate the thumbs up. I'm gonna restart this real quick, all right, y'all? The TV was on. Patty was sitting in the love seat in the front of it, dividing her attention between a pile of sewing and her favorite game show, Family Feud. Oh, wait, that's the Price is Right voice. Never mind. She simply adored Richard Dawson. Who the hell is Richard Dawson? She simply adored Richard Dawson and thought the watch chain he always wore was terribly sexy. Although wild horses would not have drawn this admission out of her. She also liked the show because she almost always got the most popular answers. There were no right answers on Family Feud, exactly, only the most popular ones. She had once asked Stan why the questions that seemed so easy to her usually seem so hard to the families on the show. It's probably a lot tougher when you're up there under those lights, Stanley had replied. And it seemed to her that a shadow had drifted over his face. Everything's a lot tougher when it's for real. That's when you choke, when it's for real. That was probably very true, she decided. Haha, what's up, Rada? Yes, sir, sweaty teacher Dave. It's probably a lot tougher when you're up there. That was probably very true, she decided. Stanley had really fine insights into human nature sometimes. Much finer, she considered, than his old friend William Denbrough, who had gotten rich writing a bunch of horror books which appealed to people's baser natures. Not that Irises were doing so bad themselves. The suburb where they lived was a fine one, and the home which they had purchased for $87,000 in 1979 would probably now sell quickly and painlessly for $165,000. Not that she wants to sell, but such things were good to know. That is one price jump. Whew. But such things were good to know. She sometimes drove back from the Fox Run Mall in her Volvo. Stanley drove a Mercedes Diesel. Teasing him, she called it sedanally. And sedanally? Sedanley? Sedanly? Aha. And saw her house. Sat tastefully back behind low, yew hedges, and thought, who lives here? Why, I do. Mrs. Stanley Uris does. This was not an entirely happy thought. Mixed with it was a pride so fierce that sometimes made her feel a bit ill. Once upon a time, you see, there had been a lonely 18-year-old girl named Patricia Blum who had been refused entry to the after prom party that was held at the country club in the upstate town. For fuck's sake, Stephen King. You really gotta make shit complicated for me, don't you? Really complicated words, don't you? Appreciate it, Howie. Although you can't hear me because you got the volume down, but. She had been refused admission, of course, because her last name rhymed with Plum. That was her. Just a skinny little kike Plum. 1967. It had been, and such discrimination was against the law, of course. Hard. Besides, it was all over now. Except for that part of her, it was never going to be over. Part of her would always be walking back to the car with Michael Rosenbaum, listening to the crushed gravel under her pumps and his rented formal shoes, back to his father's car, which Michael borrowed for the evening, and which he had spent the afternoon waxing. Part of her would always be walking next to Michael in his rented white dinner jacket. How it glimmered in the soft spring night. She had been in a pale green evening gown with her mother, which her mother declared made her look like a mermaid. Okay. And the idea of a kike mermaid was pretty funny. Hardy. They had walked their heads up high, heads up, and she had not wept, not then, but she had not understood. She had understood. They weren't walking back. No, not really. What they had been doing was slinking back. Slinking rhymes with stinking. Both of them feeling more Jewish than they had ever felt in their lives, feeling more like pawnbrokers, feeling like cattle cart riders, feeling oily, long-nosed, sallow-skinned, feeling like Maki's Sheenie's kikes. What? What do those words even mean? I don't even know what those words mean, dude. For fuck's sakes, you really need to have a dictionary for this book. At that moment, she had only been able to feel ashamed, had only been able to ache. And then someone had laughed. A high, shrill, tittering laugh, like a fast little running nose. And in the car, she had been able to weep. Oh, you bet. Here in the kite mermaid, whose name rhymes with plum, was weeping away like crazy. Michael Rosenbaum had put a clumsy, comforting hand on the back of her neck. She had twisted away from it, feeling ashamed, feeling dirty, feeling Jewish. There was no reason to be ashamed for being Jewish, for fuck's sakes. The house sat so tastefully back behind the yew hedges made that better, but not all better. The hurt and shame were still there, and even being accepted in this quiet, sleekly well-to-do neighborhood could make the endless walk with the sound of grating stones beneath her shoes stop happening. Not even being members of his country club, where the maître had always greeted them with a quietly respectful "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Euros." She would come home, cradled in her 1984 Volvo, and she would look at her house sitting on its expansive green lawn, and she would often, all too often, she suppose, think of that shrill titter. Titter! And she would hope that the girl who had tittered was living in a shitty tract house. Oh, it's a girl? Whoops. So now zero people watching right now. Give me 1 second, chat. I am going to put my own stream up so I can get so much time. But YouTube's just saying 0. I don't believe it's actually 0. But you know, YouTube's a dick. Ba-ba-da-ba-ba. Sorry for a brief interruption in reading, everybody. Huh. I lost a subscriber, huh? Wonder who I'm subscribed to me. Oh. Alright, now I'm in chat. Beep, 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 beep. So this is Pop-Ups 1. Hoi. Alright. And she looked at her house, sitting on its expensive green lawn, and she would often, all too often, she supposed, think of that shrill titter. And she had hoped that the girl who had tittered was living in a shitty tract house with a goy husband who beat her. That she had been pregnant 3 times and miscarriage each time. That her husband cheated on her with diseased women, and that she had slipped discs and had fallen arcs, and cysts on her dirty, tittering tongue. Ouch! It's kind of mean of her to you, Miss Euros. Damn. She would hate herself for these thoughts, these uncharitable thoughts, and promised to do better. To stop drinking those bitter gall and wormwood cocktails. Months would go by when she did not think of such thoughts. She would think, maybe all that is finally past me. I'm not that girl of 18 anymore. I am a woman of 36. The girl who heard the endless click and grate of those Driveway stones, the girl who twisted away from Michael Rosenbaum's hand when he tried to comfort her because it was a Jewish hand, and it was half a lifetime ago. That silly little mermaid is dead. I can forget her now and just be myself. Okay, good, great. But then she would be somewhere, at the supermarket maybe, and she would hear some tittering laughter from the next aisle, and her back would prickle. Her nipples would go hard and hurtful. Her hands would tighten on the bar of the shopping cart, just on each other, and she'd think, someone just told someone else I'm Jewish. I'm nothing but big-nosed Maki Kike. Stanley's nothing but big-nosed Maki Kike. He's an accountant. Sure. Jews are good at numbers. We let them into the country club. We had to. Back in 1981, when the big-nosed Maki gynecologist won his lawsuit. But we laugh at them. We laugh at them and laugh. Or she would simply hear the phantom click and grates of stones and think, mermaid, mermaid. And then the hate and shame would come flooding back, a migraine headache, and she would despair not only for herself, but for the whole human race. Werewolves. The book by Denbrough, the one she tried to read and then put aside, was about werewolves. Werewolves, shit. What did a man like that know about werewolves? Most of the time, however, she felt better than that. Felt she was better than that. She loved her man. Her house. She loved her house. And she was usually able to love herself and her love. She able to love her life and herself. Things were good. Hey, we're here in chat. Type hi. They had not always been that way, of course. Were things ever? When she accepted Stanley's engagement ring, her parents had been both angry and unhappy. She had met him at a sorority party. He had come over to her school from New York State University, where he was a scholarship student. They had been introduced by a mutual friend, and by the time that evening was over, she suspected that she had loved him. By the midterm break, she was sure. When spring came around and Stanley offered her a small diamond ring with a daisy pushed through it, she had accepted it. In the end, in spite of their qualms, her parents had accepted it as well. There was little else they could do. Now, the Stanley years would soon be sallying forth into a job market glutted with young accountants. And when he went into that jungle, he would do so with no family finances to backstop him, and with their only daughter as his hostage to fortune. But Patty was 22, a woman now, and would herself graduate with a BA. Soon graduate with a BA. And I'll be supporting that four-eyed son of a bitch for the rest of my life, Patty had heard her father say one night. Her mother had gone out for dinner, and father had drank a little too much. Shh! Should I hear you? Ruth Blum said. Patty had lain awake that night until long after midnight, dry-eyed, alternately hot and cold, hating them both. She had spent the next 2 years trying to get rid of that hate. There was too much hate inside her already. Sometimes when she looked into the mirror, she could see the things it was doing her face, the fine lines it was drawing there. That was a battle she won. Stanley had helped her. Her own parents, his own parents, had been equally concerned about their marriage. About the marriage. Hey, shout out to the one in stream. They did not, of course, believe that Stanley was destined for a life of squalor or in poverty, but they thought the kids were being hasty. Donald Uris and Andrea Bertoli had themselves married in their early 20s, but they seemed to have forgotten that fact. Only Stanley had seemed sure of himself, confident of the future, unconcerned with the pitfalls their parents saw strewn all about the kids. And in the end, it was just his confidence, rather than their fears, which had been justified. In July of 1972, with the ink barely dry on her diploma, Patty had landed a job teaching shorthand and business English and trainer, a small town 40 miles south of Atlanta. Nice. When she thought of how she had come by that job, it always struck her as a little, well, eerie. She had made a list of 40 possibles from the ads in the teacher, 40 possibles from the ads in the teacher's journals, then had written 40 letters over the 5 nights, 8 each evening, requesting further information on the job and an application for each. 22 replies indicated that the positions had been filled. In other cases, a more detailed explanation of the skills needed made it clear she wasn't in the running. Applying would only be a waste of her time and theirs. She had finished with a dozen possibles. Each looked as likely as any other. Stanley had come in while she was puzzling over them and wondering if she could possibly manage to fill a dozen teaching applications without going totally bonkers. He looked at the strew of papers on the table and then tapped the letter from the trainer's superintendent of schools. A letter which, to her, looked no more or less encouraging than any of the other ones. There, he said. She looked up at him, startled by the simple certainty in his voice. Do you know something about George that I don't? Nope. Only time I was ever there was at the movies. She looked at him, an eyebrow cocked. Gone with the Wind? Vivian Lee, Clark Gable. I'll think about it tomorrow. For tomorrow is another day. Do I sound like I come from the South, Patty? Yes, South Bronx. If you don't know anything about Georgia and you don't never been there, then why? Because it's right. Can't know that, Stanley. Sure I can, he said simply. I do. Looking at him, she had seen he wasn't joking. He really meant it. She had felt a ripple of unease go up her back. How do you know? He had been smiling a little. Now the smile faltered, and for a moment he seemed puzzled. His eyes had darkened, as if he looked inward, consulting some interior device which ticked and worked correctly, but which, ultimately, he understood no more than the average man understands the workings on the watch of a wristwatch. The turtle couldn't help us, he said suddenly. He said that quite clearly. She heard it. That inward look, that look of surprised musing, was on his face. It was starting to scare her. Stanley? What are you talking about, Stanley? Stanley? He jerked. She had been eating peaches as she went over to the applications. His hand struck the dish. It fell to the floor and broke. His eyes seemed to clear. Oh, shit. I'm sorry. Sorry, Stanley. What were you talking about? I forget, he said. But I think we have to thank Georgia, baby love. But trust me, he said. So she did. Her interview had gone smashingly. She had known she had the job when she got on the train back to New York. The head of the business department had taken an instant liking to Patty, and she to him. She had almost heard the click. The confirming letter had come a week later. The trainer consolidated school department could offer her $9,200 and a probationary contract. You are going to starve, Herbert Blum said when his daughter told him she intended to take the job. Yeah, it's probably not that much money, but back in the 70s, I'm sure that was a lot of money. Fiddle Dee Dee Scarlet. Uh, and you will be hot while you starve. Fiddle Dee Deedle, Scarlet, Stanley said when she told him what her father had said. She had been furious, near tears, but now she began to giggle. She began to giggle, and Stanley swept her into his arms. Hot they had been, starved they had not. They were married on August 19th, 1972. Patty Uris had gone to her marriage bed a virgin. She had slept naked between the cool sheets at a resort hotel in the Poconos. Her mood turbulent and stormy. Lightning flares of wanting and delicious lust. Dark clouds of fright. When Stanley slid into beside her, ropey with muscle, his junk and explanation rising from his gingery hair, she had whispered, "Don't hurt me, dear." "I will never hurt you," he whispered as he took her in his arms. And it was a promise he kept faithfully until May 27th, 1985, the night of the bath. Her teaching had gone well. Stanley had gotten a job at a bakery truck for $100 a week. Not bad. In November of that year, when the Trainer Flats shopping center opened, he got a job at the H&R Block office out there for $150. Not bad at all. And that's a week or a day? Ooh, a week. Never mind. Not that great. Not as good as I thought. Their combined income was then 17 grand a year. This seemed a king's ransom to them. In those days, when gas sold for 35 cents a gallon, no loaf of white bread could be had for a nickel less than that. In March 1973, with no fuss and no fanfare, Patty Uris had thrown away her birth control pills. In 1975, Stanley quit H&R Block and opened up his own business. All four in walls agreed that this was a foolhardy move. Not that Stanley should not have his own business. God forbid he should not have his own business. But it was too early, all of them agreed. And it put way too much of the financial burden on Patty. At least until that pitcher knocks her up, Herbert Blum told his brother morosely after a night of drinking in the kitchen. And then I'll be expected to carry them. The consensus of in-law opinion on the matter was that man should not even think about going into business for himself until he had reached a more sincere and mature age. 78, say. Again, Stanley seemed almost paternally confident. Again, it was the words, y'all. Preternaturally confident. He was young, personable, bright, apt. APT. He had made contracts working for Block. All these things were given. But he could not have known that Quarter Video, a pioneer in the vacant nor all these things were givens. But he could not have known that Quarter Video, a pioneer in the nascent videotape business, was about to settle on a huge patch of farmed out land, less than 10 miles from the suburb to which the Urises had confidently moved in 1979. Nor could they have known that Quarter would be in market for an independent marketing survey less than a year after its move to Trainer. Even if Stan had been privy to some of the information, he surely could not have believed they would have given the job to a young, respectable to Jude, who had also been a Dame Yankee, a Jew with an easy grin, a hip shot wave walking, a taste for bell-bottom jeans on his days off, and the last ghost of his adolescence, acne still on his face. Yet they had, and it seemed that Stan had known it all along. His work for CB had led to an offer of a full-time position with the company. Starting salary, 30 grand a year. And that really is only the start, Stanley told Patty in bed one night. They're going to grow like corn in August, my dear. No one blows up the world in the next 10 years or so. They're going to be right up there on the big board along Kodak and Sony and RCA. So what are you going to do? She asked, already knowing. I'm going to tell them what a pleasure it is to do business with them, he said, and laughed. He drew her close and kissed her. Moments later, he mounted her, and there were climaxes. 1, 2, and 3, like bright rockets going off in the night sky. But there was no baby. His work with Quarter Video had brought him into contact with some of Atlanta's richest and most powerful men, and they were both astonished to find that these men were mostly okay. In them, they found a degree of acceptance and broad-minded kindliness that was almost unknown in the North. Patty remembered Stanley once writing home to his mother and father. The best rich men in America live in Atlanta, Georgia. I am going to help make some of them richer. And they are going to help make me richer. And no one is going to own me except my wife, Patricia. And since I already own her, I guess that is safe enough. By the time they moved from Taylor Stanley, was incorporated and employed 6 people. In 1983, their income had entered unknown territory. Territory of which Patty had heard only the dimmest rumors. This was the fabled land of 6 figures. It had all happened with the usual ease of slipping into a pair of sneakers on Saturday morning. This sometimes frightened her. Once she had made an uneasy joke about deals with the devil. Stanley had laughed until he almost choked. But to her, it hadn't seemed that funny, and she supposed it never would. The turtle couldn't help us. Sometimes, for no reason at all, she would wake up with these thoughts in her mind, with the last fragment of an otherwise forgotten dream, and she would turn to Stanley, needing to touch him, needing to make sure he was still there. It was a good life. There was no wild drinking, no outside sex, no drugs, no boredom, no big arguments about what to do next. There was only a single cloud. It was her mother who first mentioned the presence of the cloud. That her mother would be the one to finally do so seemed, in retrospect, preordained. It finally came out as a question in one of Ruth Blum's letters. She wrote Patty once a week, and that particular letter had arrived in the early fall of 1979. Bro, too much backstory, for fuck's sakes. And that particular letter had arrived in the early fall of 1979. It came forwarded from the old trainer address, and Patty read it in the living room, filled with cardboard liquor store cartons from which spilled the possessions, looking forlorn and uprooted and dispossessed. In most ways, it was the usual Ruth Blum letter from home. 4 closely written blue pages, each one headed, just a note from Ruth. Her scrawl was nearly illegible. And Santa had once complained he could not read a single word his mother-in-law wrote. Why would you want to? Patty had responded. Ouch. Ugh. This one was full of mom's usual branded news. Ruth's Plum recollection was a broad delta, spreading out from the moving point of the noun. Wait, what? This one was full of mom's usual brand news. Ruth's Plum recollection was a broad delta, spreading out from the moving point of the now and ever winding fan of interlocking relationships. Many of the people of whom her mother wrote were beginning to fade in Patty's memory like photographs in an old photo album. But to Ruth, all of them remained fresh. Her concerns seemed for their health, and her curiosity and their vague various doings never seemed to wane. And her prognosis was unfailingly dire. Her father was still having too many stomach aches. He was sure it was just dyspepsia. The idea that he might have an ulcer, she wrote, would not cross his mind until he actually yeah, until he actually began coughing up blood. Probably not even until then. He actually began coughing up blood. Probably not even then. You know your father, dear. He works like a mule. Shit, I just tore the page. Fuck. Damn it. Might never did. Yeah, I tore it. Fucking page. Gosh darn it. Her father was still having stomach aches. And her putting with God should forgive me for saying so. Yeah. You know your father, dear. He works like a mule. And he also thinks like one sometimes. God should forgive me for saying so. Harlingen, had just gotten her tubes tied. We took cysts as big as golf balls out of her ovaries. No malignancies, thank God. But 27 ovarian cysts. Could you die? It was in the water. It was the water in New York City. She was quite sure of that. The city air is too dirty. But she was convinced it was the water that really got you after a while. It built up deposits inside a person. She doubted if Patty even knew how often she had to thank God that you kids were out in the country, where both air and water, but particularly the water, were healthier. To Ruth, all of the South, including Atlanta and Birmingham, was the country. Aunt Margaret was feuding with the power company again. Stella Flanagan had gotten married again. Some people never learned. Richie Hebert had been fired again. And in the middle of this chatting, and often catty, that point, in the middle of a paragraph, to propose of nothing which had been gone, or become which, after which Ruth Blum had casually asked the dreaded question. So, when are you and Sam going to make us grandparents? We're all ready to start spoiling him or her, right? In case you hadn't noticed, Patsy, we're not getting any younger. And then on is a Bruckner girl from down the block who had been sent home from school because she was wearing no bra and a blouse that you could see right through. Feeling alone, homesick from their old place in Trainer, feeling unsure and more than a little afraid of what might be ahead, Patty had gone into what was to become their bedroom and had lain down upon the mattress. The box spring was still out in the garage, and the mattress lying all by itself on the carpetless floor looked like an artifact cast on the strange yellow beach. She put her head in her arms and lay down weeping for nearly 20 minutes. She supposed that cry had been coming anyway. Her mother's letter had just brought it on sooner. The way dust hurries into tickling your nose into a sneeze. The way the dust hurries that tickle in your nose into a sneeze. Stanley wanted kids. She wanted kids. They were as compatible on that subject as they were on their enjoyment of Woody Allen's films. There are more or less regular attendance at synagogue. Their political leanings, their dislike of marijuana, a hundred of other things. Actually, speak of Mary Jane. I'll take a little quick swap. Cheers in chat. Fanboys here. Not quite there. Yeah. Nice, and I found my spot right away. I like when it happens. There had been an agreement between them about the room so strong they rarely spoke of. They rarely. One second, chat. There had been an agreement between them about the room so strong, about that room so strong that rarely spoke of it. It was simply there, like their noses or the wedding rings on their left hands. Someday that room would belong to Andy or a Jenny. But where was that child? The sewing machine, baskets of fabric, and the card table, and the desk, and the lazy boy all kept their places, seeming each month to solidify their holds on their respective positions in the room, and to further establish their legitimacy. So she thought, although she never could quite crystallize that thought. Like the word pornographic was a concept that danced just beyond her ability to quantify. But she did remember one time when she got her period, sliding open the cupboard under the bathroom sink to get a sanitary napkin. She remembered looking at the boxes Stay Free and thinking the box looked almost smug, seeming to almost say, "Hello, Patty. We are your children. We are the only children you will ever have. You are hungry. Nurse us. Nurse us, I'm dead." In 1976, 3 years after she had thrown away the last cycle of her overall tablets, they saw a doctor named Harbeke in Atlanta. "We want to know if there is something wrong," Simon said. "And we want to know if we can do anything about it, if there is." They took the test. They showed that Stanley's sperm was perky, that Patty's eggs were fertile, that all the channels that were supposed to be open were open. Harkave, who wore no wedding ring, and who had the open, pleasant, ruddy face of a college grad, student just back from his merchant skiing vacation in Colorado, told them maybe it's just nerves. He told them that such a problem was by no means uncommon. He told them that there seemed to be a psychological correlative in such cases that was in some way very similar to sexual impotency. The more you wanted, the less you could. They would have to relax. If they could, to forget all about preconception when they had sex. Stan was grumpy on the way home. Patty asked him why. "I never do." "Do what?" "Think of procreation during." She began to giggle, even though she was feeling a bit lonesome and frightened. And that night, lying in bed, long after she believed Salem might be asleep, he had frightened her by speaking out of the dark. His voice was flat, but nevertheless choked with tears. "It's me," he said. "It's my fault." She rolled toward him, groped him, held him. "Don't be stupid," she said, but her heart was beating fast, much too fast. It wasn't just that he had startled her. It was as if he had looked into her mind and read a secret conviction she held there, but of which she had not known until this minute. No rhyme, no reason. She knew that he was right. There was something wrong, and it wasn't her. It was him. Something in him. Don't be such a klutz, she whispered fiercely against his shoulder. He was sweating lightly and became suddenly aware that he was afraid. A fear was coming up in cold waves. Lying naked with him was suddenly lying naked in front of him in an open refrigerator. I'm not a klutz. I'm not being stupid, he said, in that same voice which simultaneously flat and choked with emotion. Well, I need to read. I want to see how many more pages I got for this chapter. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 more chapters. 8 more pages. I mean, sakes. All right, yeah, we're only going to be reading one chapter today. Actually, I gotta go use the restroom real quick. I'll finish the 8 pages first. Fuck it. Which just sounds like fun choked with emotion. You know it's me, but I don't know why. You can't know any such thing. Her voice is harsh, scolding. Her mother's voice when her mother was afraid. And even as she scolded him, a shudder ran through her body, twisting it like a whip. Stanley felt it, and his arms tightened around her. Sometimes I think I know why. Sometimes I have a dream, a bad dream. And I wake up and I think, I know what's wrong. Not just you not catching pregnant, everything. Everything that's wrong with my life. Stanley, nothing's wrong with your life. I don't mean from the inside. From inside, I was fine. I'm talking about outside. Something that should be over and isn't. I wake up from these dreams and think, a whole pleasant life lives in nothing but the eye of the storm I don't understand. I'm afraid, but then it just fades the way dreams do. She knew that he had sometimes dreamed uneasily. On half a dozen occasions he had awakened her, thrashing and moaning. Probably there had been other times when she had slept through his dark interludes. Whenever she reached for him and asked him, he said the same thing. I can't remember. Then he would reach for his cigarettes and smoke sitting up in bed, waiting for the residue of the dream to pass through his pores like bad sweat. No kids. On the night of May 20th, 1985, the night of the bath, their assorted in-laws were still waiting to be grandparents. The extra room was still an extra room. The stay-free Maxis and stay-free Minis still occupy their accustomed places in the cupboard under the bathroom sink. The cardinal still paid in his monthly visit. Her mother, who was much occupied with her own affairs, but not entirely oblivious to her daughter's pains, had stopped asking in her letters, and when Stanley and Patty made her twice. Her mother, who was much occupied with her own affairs, but not entirely oblivious to her daughter's pain, had stopped asking in her letters, and when Stanley and Patty made their twice yearly trips back to New York, there were no more humorous remarks about whether or not they had taken their vitamin E. Stanley had also stopped mentioning babies, but sometimes, when she didn't know she was looking, she saw a shadow on his face. Some shadow. As if he were there trying desperately to remember something. Other than that one cloud, their lives were pleasant enough until the phone rang during the middle family feud on the night of May 28th. Patty had 6 of Stan's shirts, 2 of her blouses, her sewing kit, and her odd button box. Stan had the new William Denbrough novel, not even out in paper book yet, in his hands. Hey, I'm reading paper book, so I feel that. There was a snarling beast out in front of the book. On the back was a bald man wearing glasses. Stan was sitting near the phone. He picked it up and said, "Hello, yours, residence." He listened, and a frown line delved between his eyebrows. "Who did you say?" Patty felt an instant of fright. Later, shame would cause her to lie and tell her parents that she had known something was wrong from the instant the telephone had rung. But in reality, there had only been that one instant, that one quick look up from her sewing. But maybe that was all right. Maybe they both had suspected that something was coming long before that phone call. Something that didn't fit with the next house, set tastefully back behind the low yew hedges. Something so much given that it really didn't need much of an acknowledgement. That one sharp instant of fright, like the stab of a quickly withdrawn ice pick, was enough. "Is it Mom?" She mouthed at him in that instant, thinking that perhaps her father, 20 pounds overweight and prone to what they called the belly ache since his early 40s, had had a heart attack. Stan shook his head at her, and then smiled a bit at something on the voice was saying. "You? Well, I'll be goddamn. Mike, how do you?" He fell silent again, listening. As his smile faded, she recognized, or thought she did, his analytic expression, the one which said something was unfolding a problem, or explaining a sudden change in an ongoing situation, or telling him something strange and interesting. This last was probably the case, she gathered. A new client? An old friend, perhaps? She turned her attention back to the TV, where a woman was flinging her arms around Richard Dawson and kissing him madly. She thought Richard Dawson must get kissed even more uh, than Blarney himself, than the Blarney Stone. She also thought she wouldn't mind kissing him herself. And she began searching for a black button to match the one on Stanley's blue denim shirt. Patty was vaguely aware of the conversation was settling into a smoother groove. Stanley grunted occasionally and once asked, "Are you sure, Mike?" Finally, after a very long pause, he said, "All right, yeah, I understand. Yes, everything. Add the picture. What? No, I can't absolutely promise that, but I'll consider it carefully. You know that oh, he did? Well, you bet. Of course I do. Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yes. Bye bye." He hung up. Patty glanced at him and saw him staring blankly into space over the TV set. On her show, the audience was applauding the Ryan family, which had just scored 280 points. Most of them by guessing the audience survey would answer math in response to the question, "What class will people say Junior hates most in school?" Yeah, math is definitely right. I definitely agree with math. I hated math back in high school. She would later tell her parents that she thought Stanley's face had looked a little off color, and so she did. But she neglected to tell them that she dismissed it at the time as only a trick of the table lamp, with its green glass shade. "Who was that, Stan?" Hmm? He looked around at her. She thought, "Welcome, Mr. Stream, who just joined." Am I? She thought the look on his face was one of gentle abstraction, perhaps mixed with minor annoyance. It was only later, replaying the scene in her mind again and again, as she began to believe it was the expression of a man who was methodically unplugging himself from reality, one chord at a time. The face of a man who was heading out of the blue and into the black. Who was that on the phone? No one, he said. No one, really. I think I'll take a bath. She stood up. What? At 7 o'clock? He didn't answer, only left the room. She might have asked him if something was wrong. Might have even gone in after them and asked him if he was sick to his stomach. He was sexually uninhibited, whatever the fuck that word is. But he could be oddly prim about other things. And it wouldn't be at all unlike him to say he was going to take a bath when what he really had to do was whoop something which hadn't agreed with him. But now a new family, the Piscopos, were being introduced, and Patty just knew Richard Dawson would find something funny to say about that name. And besides, she was having the devil's own time. Find a black button. Although she knew there was loads of them in the button box, they hid, of course. That was the only explanation. So she let him go and did not think of him again until the credits roll. When she looked up and saw his chair empty. And she had heard the water running into the tub upstairs, and had heard it stop 5 or 10 minutes later. But now she realized she had never heard the fridge door open and close. And that meant he was up there without a can of beer. Something had called him up and dropped a big fat problem in his lap, and had she offered him a single word of commiseration? No. Try to draw him out a little about it? No. Even though something was wrong? For the third time? No. All because of that stupid TV show. She couldn't even really blame the buttons. They're the only excuse. Okay. She'd take him up a can of Dixie. Dixie? What kind of beer is Dixie? I never heard of that beer. And sit beside him on the edge of the bed, scrub his back, play geisha, and wash his hair if he wanted her to. And just find out what the problem was. Or who it was. She got a can of beer out of the fridge and went upstairs with it. The first real disquiet stirred in her when she saw that the bathroom door was shut. Not just partway closed, but shut tight. Stanley never closed the door when he was taking a bath. It was something of a joke between them. The closed door meant he was doing something his mother had taught him. The open door meant he would not be adverse to doing something, the teaching of which his mother had been quite properly left to others. Patty tapped onto the door through her nails, suddenly aware of the reptilian clicking sound they made on the wood. And sorry, tapping on the bathroom door, knocking like a guest, was something she had never done before in her married life. Not here, not on any other door in the house. The disquiet grew strongly in her, and she thought of Carson Lake, where she had gone swimming often as a girl. By the 1st of August, the lake was as warm as a tub, but then you hit a cold pocket that would shiver you with the surprise and delight. 1 minute you're warm, the next moment you felt as if the temperature had plummeted 20 degrees below your hips. Minus the delight, that was how she felt now, as if she had just struck a cold pocket. Only this cold pocket was not below her hips, chilling her teenager's legs in the black depths of Carson Lake. This one was around her heart. Stanley? Stan? This time she did not tap. This time she did more than tap with her nails. She rapped on the door. When there was still no answer, she hammered on it. Stanley! Her heart wasn't in her chest anymore. It was beating in her throat, making it hard to breathe. Stanley! And the silence following her shout, just the sound of herself shouting up here, less than 30 feet less than the place where she laid her head down, went to sleep each night, frightened her even more. She heard a sound which brought panic up Bellow stairs parted her mind like an unwelcome guest. Such a small sound, really. It was only the one sound of dripping water. Plink, pause, plink, pause, plink, pause, plink. She could see the drops forming on the snout of the faucet, growing heavy and fat there, growing pregnant there, and then falling off. Plink. Just that sound. No other. And she was suddenly, terribly sure that it had been Stanley, not her father, who had been stricken with a heart attack tonight. With a moan, she gripped the cut glass doorknob and turned it, yet still the door would not move. It was locked. And suddenly three nevers occurred to Patty, years in rapid succession. Stanley never took a bath in the early evening. Stanley never closed the door unless he was using the toilet. And Stanley never locked the door against her at all. Was it possible she went crazily? To prepare for a heart attack? Patty ran her tongue over her lips, producing sound in her head with fine sandpaper sliding around the board, and called his name again. There was still no answer except a steady, deliberate drip of the faucet. She looked down and still held the can of Dixie beer in one hand. She gazed at it stupidly, her heart running like a rabbit in her throat. She gazed as if she had never seen a can of beer in her whole life before this minute. And indeed, it seemed she had never had. Or it was not like this one ever before. Because when she blinked her eyes, it turned into a telephone number, or a telephone handset, as black and threatening as a hand snake. As a snake. A hand snake. May I help you, ma'am? Do you have a problem? The snake spat at her. Patty slammed it down in its cradle and stepped away, rubbing the hand which had held it. She looked around and saw she was back in the TV room, and understood that the panic which had come into the front of her mind, like a prowler walking quietly in a flight of stairs, had its way up with her. Now she could remember dropping the beer can outside the bathroom door and pelting long back down the stairs, thinking vaguely, this is all a mistake of some kind. We'll laugh about it later. He filled the tub up and then remembered he didn't have cigarettes. Went out to get them before he took his clothes off. Yes, obviously. Yes, only he had already locked the bathroom door from the inside, and because it was too much of a bother to unlock it again, he had simply opened the window over the tub and gone down for the side of the house like a fly crawling down a wall. Sure, of course, sure. Panic was rising in her mind again. It was like a bitter black coffee threatening to overflow the rim of the cup. She closed her eyes and fought against it. She stood there, perfectly still. Perfectly still, a pale statue with a pulse beating in its throat. Now she could remember running back down there, feet stuttering on the stair levels, running for the phone. Oh, yes, sure. But who had she meant to call? Crazily, she thought. I would call the turtle, but the turtle couldn't help us. Didn't matter anyway. She had gotten as far as 0, and she must have said something not quite standard, because the operator had asked if there had been a problem. She had one, all right. But how did you tell that faceless voice that Stanley had locked himself in the bathroom and didn't answer her? That she heard that the steady sound of the water dripping into the tub was killing her heart. Someone had to help. Someone. She put the back of her hand into her mouth and literally bit down on it. She tried to think, tried to force herself to think. The spare keys. The spare keys in the kitchen cupboard. She got going, and one slippered foot kicked the bag of buttons resting beside the chair. Some of the buttons fell out, glittering her like glazed eyes in the lamplight. She saw at least half a dozen black ones. Mounted inside the door of the cupboard over the double basin sink was a large varnished board in the shape of a key. One of Stan's clients had made it in his workshop and given it to him 2 Christmases ago. The keyboard was studded with small hooks, and swinging on there were all kinds of keys to the house. Took 2 duplicates of each to the hook. 2 duplicates of each to a hook. Beneath each hook was a strip of mystic tape. Each strip lettered in Stan's small, neat printing. Garage, attic, D-stairs bath, upstairs bath, front door, back door. Off to one side were ignition key dupes labeled MB and Volvo. Patty snatched the keys marked upstairs bath, began to run for the stairs, then made herself walk. Running made the panic want to come back. The panic was too close to the surface as it was. Also, as it just was walked, maybe nothing would go wrong, be wrong. Or if there was something wrong, Guy could look down, see she was just walking and think, oh good. I pulled a hell of a boner, but I've got time to take it back, all back. Walking as sedately as a woman on her way to a ladies' book circle meeting, she went up the stairs and down to the closed bathroom door. Stanley, she called, trying the door again at the same time, sounding more afraid than ever, not wanting to use the key because having to use the key was somehow too final. If God hadn't taken it back by the time she used the key, then he never would. The age of miracles, after all, was past. But the door was still locked. The deliberate plink by the drop, dripping water was her only answer. Her hand was shaking, and the key clattered all the way around the plate before finding its way into the keyhole and socking itself at home. She turned it and heard the lock snap back. She fumbled for the cut glass knob. It turned to slide through her hand again, not because the door was locked this time, but because her palm was wet with sweat. She firmed her grip and made it turn. She pushed the door open. Stanley! Stanley! She looked at the tub with its blue shower curtain bunched at the far ends of the stainless steel rod and forgot how to finish her husband's name. She simply stared at the tub, her face as solemn as the face of a child on her first day to school. In a moment, she would begin to scream, and Anita Mackenzie next door would hear her. And it would be Anita Mackenzie who would call the police, convinced that someone had broken into the Uris's home and that people were being killed over there. But for now, this one moment, Patty Uris simply stood silent, her hands clasped in front of her against her dark cotton skirt, her face solemn, her eyes huge. And now, the look of almost holy solemnity began to transform itself into something else. The huge eyes began to bulge, and her mouth pulled back into a dreadful grin of horror. She wanted to scream and couldn't. The screams were too big to come out. The bathroom was lit by fluorescent tubes. It was very bright. There were no shadows. You could see everything, whether you wanted to or not. The water in the tub was bright pink. Sensitive subject matter coming up now. Fair one. Stanley lay with his back propped against the rear of the tub. His head had rolled so far back on his neck that strands of his short black hair had brushed the skin between his shoulder blades. If his staring eyes had been still being capable of seeing, she would have looked upside down to him. His mouth hung open like a sprung door. His expression was one of abysmal, frozen horror. A package of Gillette Platinum Plus razor blades lay on the rim of the tub. He had slit his inner forearms open. Ow, fuck, just even reading that sentence. From wrist to the crick of the elbow, and I had crossed each of these cuts just below the bracelets of fortune, making a bloody spiral capital T's. The gashes glared red-purple in the harsh white light. She thought the exposed tendons and ligaments looked like cuts of cheap beef. A drop of water gathered at the lip of the shining chromium faucet. It grew fat, grew pregnant, you might say. It sparkled. It dropped. He had dipped his right forefinger in his own blood and had written a single word on the blue tiles above the tub. Written in it was two huge, staggering letters. A zigzag, bloody fingerprint fell away from the second letter of the word. His finger made the mark, she saw, as his hand fell into the tub where it now floated. She thought Stanley must have made the mark, his final impression on the world. As he lost consciousness, it seemed to cry out at her. It. Capital I, capital T. Another drop fell into the tub. Pink. That did it. Patty Uris had at last found her voice. Staring into her husband's dead and sparkling eyes, she began to scream. All right, chat. So that was one section of a chapter. That wasn't even one chapter. That was section 1 of chapter 3. So this has been Daves-Raves, and I will see you guys for section 2, entitled Richie Tozier. Fuck, yeah. And chat. Richard Tozier takes a powder. Don't know what the fuck that's gonna be about, but I guess we'll find out in the next episode. Daves-Raves out. Peace.